This is Signal and Noise, bringing clarity to the chaos of modern marketing.
Welcome to Signal and Noise. Today's guest is Jessica Hogue, the Chief Data Officer of Consumer Media at Hearst, someone that I, as well as Rio, know really well. She is one of the Where Are You Now Nielsen execs that I worked with for quite a while when I was part of Nielsen. This episode's called Publisher Monetization. Woes is the news media in Jeopardy. And for those that don't know Jessica, she's a terrific woman. She led a bunch of really high-profile product leadership and digital roles at Nielsen, as I mentioned, for about 12 years. I joined through an acquisition from Exalate and worked with her a lot when we launched the Nielsen Marketing Cloud for a few years. And then she moved on to Innovid, helped take Innovid public. She was there for a little bit over 4 years. And now she is the Chief Data Officer of Consumer Media at Hearst. And she serves a really important role of combining and enriching and normalizing all of their consumer audience data across all of their properties within Hearst. And she plays a really good, and I saw this at Nielsen, translation layer between the traditional world of media, the linear world of media, which she certainly did with the television ecosystem, and the digital, largely digital media world. So we're thrilled to have her. She follows a long list of really great guests that Rio and I have had, including Stephanie Laser, Ben Wild, Dr. Augustine Fu, Shiv Gupta, Mark Zagorski, Lou Piscalis, and we've got a whole bunch more coming up, Adam Greco, but I think you're really going to enjoy this episode in Rio. I was thrilled with the interview, and I know you've got some feelings about that as well.
Yeah, Jessica's great. I mean, she's so smart. She's been in the industry, Brett, as you mentioned, forever. She's seen a lot of the big changes. She's kind of been right there. Some of the coolest, most innovative companies. She's just a really smart person. And I love what she's doing at Hearst. And you'll hear it in the episode, how like they're really trying to prepare for a totally different future. And they really want to be at the vanguard of this as the industry. And a big part of that's going to be, I mean, she's Chief Data Officer, right? Like preparing that data foundation, getting the audience data, from all these different places. And it's a big sprawling business that spans everything from traditional television, linear television, to digital, to magazines. So it's cool hearing like what their vision is, what she's working on. Hearst did pretty well last year. I mean, this year we'll see. It's been a tough environment for news publishers the last 20 years. And we talk about that a little bit, but last year they had really good performance. Looking at here, they had record profits. And so it's a good success story. A couple other news items that probably worth mentioning as we kick this off. Not directly related, but definitely within kind of the world of advertising and ad tech. We had some recent Google news is interesting. They keep changing by the day, right? There was finally the remedies from Judge Mehta about what to do following the antitrust trial when it was decided they were a monopoly. I tweeted that I thought this was a big nothing burger. I mean, really.
Yeah, the Google search specifically, not their sell side display network.
Yeah, that's coming, right? But they get to keep Chrome. They don't have to spin it off, right? Yep. They get to keep nothing in the business is really impacted in a big way. Their stock bumped almost 7%. As a result of that.
It's like the Department of Justice sort of gave some recommendations, right? But nothing that seems entirely enforceable. And I'm not sure it's going to really change.
The share search data, and that's going to take years, right?
Yeah.
It's going to take years. So I think Google ends up looking pretty good up to this. But that said, Brett, there's still the ad tech part. That's I think they probably end up spinning that off. I mean, but. I think it'd be better for them anyway. I think it's only contributing a few $1 billion to their bottom line. So who really cares if you're Google, right? You focus on the future, which is definitely going to be AI search, right? Although I think this decision it kind of like harkens back to remember the Microsoft decision, the DOJ sued them for being a monopoly.
Yeah. And then didn't do anything. Didn't sort of let them operate as the same business, really.
Remember, it forced them to unbundle their browser from the hardware, right? So
that's true.
But it was a few years later, Chrome's the bigger browser than Edge, right? Or whatever Internet Explorer. So it was kind of a nothing burger back then. I mean, it seemed like it was going to be meaningful, but ended up it was too little too late. I almost think this is the same thing, right? AI search is really changing it. That's where Google needs to compete. They were a monopoly in existing search and as well as, with their ad tech, owning both buy and sell. But it's almost like I'm going to say that's totally the past, but it almost seems like that's less important moving forward than it has been. So I don't know,
this case started in 2020 it started in 2020 and it's a very different world in 2025 than it was in 2020.
Totally.
So
But
it's interesting how slowly these justice motions move. And by the time they
not
come
the
to
speed of
fruition-
tech.
Yeah, not the speed of tech. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, but at the same time, Google, like I think the EU did find them this morning. It was announced several $billion. I mean, for Google, it's peanuts, right? I mean, so like, it looks like they're going to end up exiting this probably okay, the traditional business. Maybe they get forced to sell off the ad tech side of it, which would probably be a good thing. But I think that was the big news of this last couple of weeks. Probably worth calling out. But will this impact news publishers? I think the ad tech decision probably will have a bigger impact on them moving forward. But everything's I think AI is the big story here, not necessarily the Google decision.
Yeah, they're saying let market forces win, and AI is one of those market forces that's changed the entire landscape since 2020 of how search is being monetized and utilized by publishers and other vendors.
Yeah, as referral traffic changes and as Google Zero kind of that day approaches. So I think that's the bigger story, and that's certainly the bigger impact on publishers. So with that, why don't we jump into the episode? It's going to be a fun one. And I agree with you, Brett. It kind of continues this. We talked to Steph Laser about publisher tech and this replatforming. We have the Lupa Scholars, where we talk about the future of news. And here you get Jessica Hogue, who's right in the front lines, like at a big traditional publisher that's transitioning into a digital first publisher. So enjoy it, everyone. It's a good one.
Hey, Jessica, welcome to Signal and Noise. Glad to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, it's so fun to be here. Thank you.
And you and I go back quite a few years. We're both sort of part of what I like to call the Nielsen Mafia. And I'm in a company now with about 10 or 15 Nielsen people, so it holds well. And you and Rio worked together when Rio was Salon Consulting, doing some work for Hearst. And I figured I'd love to hear a little bit about, or I think our audience would love to hear a little bit about your background and kind of what brought you to your current role as Chief Data Officer. At Hearst.
Yeah, it's I get asked this question a fair amount because I think people are always interested in everyone else's career journey, and it speaks a little to what we're trying to do at Hearst too. So it's fun to kind of go back and sort of look at how did I get here actually. So as you pointed out, a lot of my roots are really in analytics and measurement from more than a decade at Nielsen. I actually landed there in 06, 07 when the company had made an acquisition in a small social listening startup. And so I do kind of, there is a bit of a through line in my own journey, which is, I like the build phase. I like the kind of startup, market fit finding era, if you will. But
as painful as it can be sometimes.
Yeah, it's change. It's high intensity. It's all good, but yeah. So Nielsen, I spent in a variety of different roles and in different sort of parts of that business at the time. The one sort of consistent theme I was always working on is triangulating data sets, right, into different analytics or measurement products. And that occurred to me much later in the process of that's what I always kind of tried to get back to. And then from Nielsen, I went to Innovid, which was just a phenomenal place to land in the sort of rise of CTV. I mean, by the time I got to Innovid, it was already, a very vibrant, but still young company, not a startup per se, but still ascending in a lot of ways.
And you took them public, or you were there when they went public?
I was, yeah. So that kind of happened. It was really, I mean, it's both a business case, it's thrilling, it's incredible to work with founders and see that kind of trajectory.
And that was a long time. That was a long time coming, right? They'd been around for quite a while, well over a decade, I believe.
Yeah, I think they were around 11 years old, if I remember correctly, around that time. So I joined to help build a measurement and analytics framework and portfolio on top of the core technology, which is the ad serving business at the time. And so that was also, I was a general manager. I got to build that from the start. And, it started with, Tal Chalozin, which I'm sure a lot of folks in your audience and community will be familiar with, who had so many brilliant ideas about where the company could go. And so that was a really fun journey. We built that out. We scaled that with the acquisition of TV Squared. And then, the company went public and continues to really thrive in the measurement category as now a, provider of outcome and reach and frequency metrics, which is really quite remarkable to see, just knowing how tough that was from the jump.
And you ran point on the TV Squared acquisition and the kind of product management of that. That was Joe Kinsella's company, right?
Yeah, that I wouldn't say that I ran point. Yeah, that was very much a sort of community activity.
Yeah.
But I like to think that I contributed a lot to, what the company could become and why we had a right to sort of bring measurement and analytics to the marketplace, just especially, from my various tours, knowing how complicated it was. But I had a pretty strong point of view at the time that the buy side, which Innovid is really, ad tech facing the buy side, or it was, at the time, had a right to play in the sort of top-down set of metrics. We were delivering CTV at massive scale every day, and what everybody needed? Reach and frequency metrics with like demographics, and then to be able to know, did the creative work, did it produce an outcome? And so I was really passionate about that, and the TV Squared acquisition brought so much to that sort of funnel play, if you will. And then, of course, the diversification into working with publishers on sort of more of a sell side offering as well. So it was great. Joe is phenomenal. It was really fun to get to work with her.
She is hilarious too. I had her on.
If you haven't had her on yet,
I had her on a panel at one of our Brave New Worlds events, which I think it was the same event that you spoke at. And she just had me laughing on the panel the entire time. She was
She's not been a guest in this podcast yet, Jessica, but hopefully in the
quite a
personality.
Yeah, she is. So let's see. So how did I get to Hearst? I think somewhat similarly to what we've been talking about already. Hearst didn't have a chief data officer in consumer media, and so it's been really quite a joy and a privilege to be able to be the first and sort of design. What does this role do, and what's our reason for being, and so part of that still has a little bit of a an entrepreneurial sense to it.
Yeah, I was thinking that it does it. You're kind of defining your role in a sense and defining the function, right? In a sense.
Exactly.
The entrepreneur, isn't that what that's described, right? Yeah,
you're exactly right, Rio. It's definitely inside of this incredible storied institution. And so, really our role here is to sort of develop and inform and execute on data strategies. That's kind of the, job number one. Sometimes that takes, really different forms. Sometimes it's, partnering and thinking out loud with folks that are data leaders in their respective organizations. But what my team has really grown into a function to support a couple of areas. Largely I would sort of situate it as building infrastructure around users and user data, and then increasingly we're moving on sort of the content side. And part of our opportunity is to do those things at scale, so that we get the sort of, scale across the full footprint of Hearst Media properties and divisions. But also it kind of comes back to a very sort of core functional thing, which is, we know on the other side of all of these various transformations that media companies and publishers, we want to have the best possible relationships with our actual readers and visitors and audience. And so, for me, in many ways, my day job is data, but it's kind of still, it's audience at the end of the day. And we saw a big opportunity to be able to infuse a lot of infrastructure and data and investment behind building out those kind of microservices, if you will, and partnering really closely with the various folks in our three divisions.
Well, Jessica, we are thrilled to have you on here today. I mean, this is a really important topic, and we've come at it from different angles over previous episodes. Definitely as Rizone, she talked about really the tech and the replatforming. We had Dr. Fu on who talked about some of some things publishers experiencing for everything from ad fraud to referral revenue dipping. And last week we talked a little bit about some of the stuff going with AI. So we're thrilled to have you here. And I guess the background here for those who are a little newer to this is the whole business model really that has bankrolled and funded and supported, let's say, not only newsrooms, but investigative journalism, as well as, all types of traditional media, magazines. It's really been buckling under these converging forces, everything from programmatic tech taxes that have siphoned away a ton of revenue from publishers to mounting signal loss as cookies have kind of gone away, kind of not. I mean, I guess for the most part they have. And now AI, right? It's the latest thing. I mean, we're going to talk about that a lot as it, referral traffic dips, and that's definitely impacting revenue from display, right? It's going to affect publishers. So I guess the bigger question is, what is this doing to quality journalism? And by extension, the concept of really a vibrant free press, because it really does depend on publishers having healthy businesses and being able to replace the dollars they're losing with new revenue streams, whether that's smarter data strategies, richer first-party identity. A lot of the stuff you're working on, Jessica, we're really excited to hear about, and just finding ways to bring in new revenue streams. We're going to be talking about that. And I really think that fewer people sit closer to this inflection point than you do as your role of Chief Data Officer at Hearst, overseeing data and development for an amazing, 137-year-old media institution. I think we can call it that has properties across magazines, newspapers, streaming, and commerce. And it's a big job to figure out how to turn this audience insight into sustainable value, not only for the readers that you mentioned, but for your advertisers. So I think it's a cool vantage point you have, mixing this legacy print background with the stewardship of the metrics, everything from digital subscriptions to private marketplace yields, your clean room partnerships, what you're doing with AI. In short, really navigating the crossroads, right, of I think where the industry is.
Yeah. So Hearst, established in 1887? And William Randolph Hearst was right. 23, and I think the first time I heard about it was yellow journalism, when you're in high school or middle school. So knowing that you're coming from sort of a legacy, or you're in a legacy media, or traditionally a legacy media organization that's been around for a long time. Rio just laid out the thesis. Publisher monetization's challenged. It's in a challenged state, right? The news media as we've known it, and you probably have read the articles from Lou Pascalis or heard him talking about defending the open web and how critical it is to our own democracy. Just at a very high level, when you think about digital transformation, because it's a driver of 75 to 80% of digital publisher revenue right now. How are you thinking about that journey at Hearst, and how is your team sort of helping to transform to adapt to some of these challenges?
Yeah, I have so much to say and on this one, and there's a lot to unpack there, of course. So first of all, in the thesis, no question, things are, the models that got us here. If we talk about sort of high margin, underwritten by ad sales, lots of consumer data, by the way, there is no sort of one way out of this situation anymore. And I think, that's not unique to us and anyone in this sort of industry right now.
To everyone, yeah.
Yeah. And, I think you called it out. There are certainly, shifts in big platform dynamics. There's regulatory dynamics, obviously generative AI. So those are all, in my mind, somewhat, existential, right, in nature and really big, long and sort of enduring trends. And then there's just the kind of workaday stuff that we've all been grinding it out on. You hit the nail on the head. It's, cookie deprecation that, frankly, I was still at Nielsen when we were talking about the cookie apocalypse. And I'm like,
conversation's been going on
it's like the year of mobile that was a decade. So, yep, that's still, but it is, the practicality of having these really sort of opaque environments is still something to navigate on a day-to-day basis. Brand safety and the sort of impact to journalism is still something we're very much sort of working the problem on. And, just the supply chain sort of at large. Interestingly, the supply chain we often talk about in ad tech, but I see just as many shifts in MarTech, and we're sort of, in both. So all of those things for sure. I think that, and this is really, what compelled me to come here at this time, is it's a big inflection point. So, you can kind of look at it as, okay, it's just a lot of stuff to do. And that's true. I think we have the opportunity, and this is kind of the what inspires our vision, to re-architect a lot of the foundations. And so, from our role just as the data piece, data is sort of fundamental and core, but it does kind of require us in this moment to really rethink, how did we build the sort of foundational components of tech and data and, user experience? How do we do that going forward? Certainly diversifying revenue, which I think we'll get into as well. And, I don't sit in the revenue lane necessarily, but a lot of what my team does is sort of create capabilities to monetize our user experiences in a variety of different ways. And there's lots of different things happening on that front. So yeah, I think it is very much a moment of a lot of change. I think I sort of choose to, those things invigorate me. I mean, I've always kind of been in roles at some amount of change. And this is probably true of everybody's career, right? But even at Nielsen, we were going through the changes in streaming and television consumption for a long time. So I happen to, find those things, sort of those environments kind of interesting. And you can do a lot if you have the stamina, I think, to work through them.
Yeah, it is the advertising industry. And you made some really good points. We talked about this with Stephanie Laser about re-architecting, re-platforming, which is not something that's unique to Hearst. It's common across all, whether they're digital or legacy linear publishers. It's pretty common from a data strategy and MarTech perspective. So
I think having audiences, having the measurement in place, it's not easy, right? And I think there's a lot of time that requires investments. So
yeah. But you kind of alluded to it earlier too. I mean, I think that transformation sort of inside of a company, and if we, describe that as intrapreneurship or what have you, I'm really inspired by the trajectory of Hearst in a lot of ways. And I maybe the company is less well known for this on the media side, but, obviously, Hearst has been around for more than a century, approaching 140 years, which is really quite staggering when you think about it. And I remember really first learning about William Randolph Hearst when I was in J school, and it was, the battle between Hearst and Pulitzer, and it was so fascinating to read about. But if you think about where the company started from as a paper business, in the 1920s and 30s, I'm probably going to get some of my chronology a little off here, diversified into magazines, which was a very different product at that time. And with Cosmo and Good Housekeeping, these are brands that are still with us today. If you look at what the new editor-in-chief is doing with the brand Cosmo, it's like it's reinventing and sort of reconnecting to a lot of the values of that brand too. So, and then
you have a little show and tell, right, around the Cosmopolitan magazine. I think
you
might be able to.
Thank you for teeing this up. So for your studio audience, if you can see, I've got this gorgeous piece of, this is the...
There you go, you can see it now. It's a little blurry,
What a great brand font Cosmopolitan had. It's
so
iconic.
We have a small place in the Adirondacks, and I was in this, small sort of, antique shop, and I was walking up the stairs looking for I don't know what, and on the side of this wall were a number of different framed covers of old magazines, and I immediately locked in and I saw Hearst International's Cosmopolitan, and I was like, I must have that. And so it's sitting here in my office as kind of a reminder of the history of the company. But yeah, I mean, this company has been doing transformation and diversification, and I think it's very much in the DNA of the company, and that's really inspiring. So it's like, okay, let's go do that again. What does it look like on the other side? There's a lot of unknowns, I would say, but yeah, the idea.
So the organizational change is a little easier because it's part of the sort of core competency of the organization because it's been doing this for so long.
I don't know that change is ever easy, but I guess I would say that there are plenty of hallmarks and really great outcomes. And also our leadership is, often is the case from leadership of go faster. And so I think all of those things kind of produce the right conditions to get through it. But yeah, I don't want to pretend that it's...
but oftentimes that's the hardest piece. If you don't have people aligned around change or accustomed to change, whether it's historically or otherwise, it becomes harder to implement because people get in the way. Right? How many times have we heard that in our career?
Right. People.
Yeah, people are the bottleneck. That's typically the case.
Yeah. But it, kind of to bring it back to what we're doing on the data side. So, because of all of those things, it was sort of, as you said, lots of companies are kind of looking at their architecture and platforms and sort of taking this as an opportunity to take stock and retool for what the future is like. And we get a lot of support for that. And a lot of, really cool collaboration with different folks in our divisions to sort of see where we fit and we can help them go faster. And that's kind of like, for us, that's the spot we want to be in.
Just turning back to monetization, obviously a really important topic. And you're looking at publishing industry in general. I mean, many people don't know this. Has been, I think, between 2002 and 2020, there was a 50% decline in revenue overall for the industry, right, which is really pretty catastrophic, right? So knowing that monetization is going to be really important. I know it's a big focus of what Hearst is doing in general in your role. A big part of that, I mean, I guess one criticism of, let's say, digital has been a good portion of programmatic ad spend does not reach publishers, right? It's siphoned off by intermediaries, by ad tech companies, by DSPs, by SSPs, by brand safety, ad verification. The list goes really on and on. I think for some deals, publishers are keeping well under 50%, right?
The tech tax.
The tech tax, right? And there's been great studies like last year, Brett, we talked about with Steph Laser, right? That like average CPMs for some open exchange are under $1, right? So like, pubs are just not getting, what's the expression? It was like digital pennies for traditional dollars, right? I mean, it's it's been tough. So like knowing that, how is Hearst repositioning its inventory mix, private marketplaces, programmatic guaranteed, direct sold deals? Like, what are you doing to capture more of the ad dollars? I'm curious to hear.
It's a really great question. I would say that there are some things that sort of are consistent across the three business units, and then some things that maybe they're kind of pursuing uniquely to how they expose themselves to the markets. But by and large, I mean, there's a huge priority around direct sold, private marketplace, programmatic guaranteed. Those are all environments where, the objective is to do a few things, right? To sort of get closer to the end customer, writ large. But those are places that we can make the environments data rich, fully controlled, brand safe, which obviously, we are really motivated to sort of be out in front around. And so I would say those are all sort of across all three of our business units. Those are all priorities. Some of our businesses are a little bit more exposed, I would say, to open auction inventory than others. And those things have sort of been in motion for a while. Interestingly, we've kind of put a little bit of a toe dip in the water around, a PMP that sort of goes across broader, sort of footprint of our inventory, and understand, from the buy side, what's interesting there, right? Because I think in a lot of ways, we can talk about the sort of importance of data, first party data. Like we've been here. Plenty of people have first party data. I don't think having first party data, you have to sort of explain the texture and the quality and the value and then make it real, which often means sort of showing it in a really transparent way. And so those are all sort of, I would say underneath the surface sort of priorities of how we're executing is to, have new and differentiated ways to also sort of make the quality of our inventory desirable such that, we're kind of shifting into those other sort of environments. I have to give major credit to the programmatic teams that actually run these functions in the divisions, which we get to partner with and see. But I think the other thing to their credit is developing really strategic relationships in the market with the sort of buy side and the buying sort of platforms. And it's kind of interesting if you think about it, because, when I started, programmatic was all about get rid of the people, get rid of the relationships, like machine to machine.
Automate everything, yeah.
Yeah. And so, what we're doing to sort of reposition that that inventory mix also comes back to having strategic relationships and partnerships, which are people-led, even though the machines are sort of doing the execution piece. And I think that's important.
Are you making changes to how, let's say, the ad sellers work with like the digital and programmatic team in terms of creating offerings, bundling different types of services? Is there anything that you're doing there that you can call out?
I mean, I would say yes, in terms of bundling. I mean, some of the types of things that have been important is to really sort of focus on the quality of the inventory and be a little bit more forward in the go-to-market of making that known. And so, that's everything from sustainability. It can be attention metrics. It can be brand safety and suitability. I do sort of feel that, even just the programmatic sort of priority and how those teams sort of work with centers of excellence, various holding companies, that's all part of it. So there's a lot of energy behind it. There's no one sort of package that I would pick out necessarily, but part of that is here's why, right? Our brands span a national footprint. If you look at the lifestyle magazine brands, and then in our news businesses, these are hyper local brands at the end of the day, immediate properties. And so I think one of the ways that we're sort of kind of wrestling through how we get more sort of exposure and how we package things is exploring where we can have really sort of an authoritative, a differentiated inventory mix, because we are hyper local. And, increasingly that's very attractive for performance advertisers that are, looking to drive outcomes, looking to have sort of precision in a certain market. So those are all kind of features, I would say, that go into where we're finding resonance in the market.
And it sounds like when you're talking about inventory, are we talking about both audience targets as well as contextual sort of news content related inventory, which seems to be the big differentiator, right? For especially at the local level.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that there's a lot of different, my sort of watchword on this front is having optionality, right? Because there are so many different requirements of what advertisers or what the buy side needs and wants, given, the vertical that they're in or the sort of objectives of any given campaign. And so, there's certainly been a massive focus on first party data. And actually, we have quite a substantial footprint of first party data, I would say stronger than a lot of web publishers too. So that continues to be sort of a priority and a defining characteristic. We're working with ecosystem IDs, but yes, I mean, contextual has been really important. And our magazine division has an incredible product called Aura Out, which is, leveraging contextual signal, AI. It's got sort of predictive elements too. And so those fit for certain use cases. We look at it as a portfolio. What are the set of, tools, KPIs, ways to sort of remix the audience, and what layers we need to apply onto that to make it addressable?
Which is kind of a data enrichment play, right?
Sure. Absolutely.
It's giving more sort of three-dimensionality to the actual audience data, right?
You think about it, Brett, like this whole signal loss, as Google's teasing it out for years. I know you wanted to get into that a little bit here. Like the hypothesis was this would really favor publishers with rich first-party data signals, right, to provide deterministic signals, as well as I think for news publishers and magazine publishers, right, who have this like great contextual data too. Like having contextual signals plus deterministic first-party data is really. I mean, people talk about premium inventory. I think you've got it in spades, right?
Yeah, I think so. And I think there's also plenty to do. I mean, I really think we're just kind of scratching the surface of what we can surface around hyperlocal audiences and intent. And, this kind of dips into not just, how programmatic and how do you sort of solve for the open auction sort of transformation, but it really does speak to, what buyers want in terms of outcomes. And where I really see this going is, if you can sort of triangulate around really high quality first party data, behavioral and contextual signals. And oh, by the way, we know a lot of how consumers behave in certain markets because we have such density in places like San Francisco, the state of Texas, the parts of New England. Where you see this going is new ways of understanding not just intent, right? But what sort of where consumers might be headed next. And I think there's probably a lot we can do on particularly our news businesses, because they're such a part of consumers' day-to-day lives and increasingly provide more utility from the content experience. All that lends itself to just new ways that we can surface and present those experiences to the advertising community, the places that they want to be.
It all ties back to relevance, right? And you've got to combine all of these things in order to make the advertising relevant to a consumer experience within any of your properties.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And, that means continuing to sort of do more, get smarter about how to put the pieces together. I mean, I don't think it's sufficient just to say, yes, we have contextual. Do you want to buy, that these things have been sort of around for a while. So we're constantly looking for, okay, what's next? And, where is the market headed? I don't know if you've done a pod yet on the outcomes era, but that's a big, we hear a lot about the, really wanting to sort of push the boundaries of outcomes. And that means a whole new set of kind of tools.
Yeah, it was Shiv Gupta. It was Shiv Gupta. We talked about that, right?
Yeah.
And what does that mean? And does that mean a double down on direct response advertising? Does it mean moving away from sort of brand awareness, halo effect, brand building advertising?
Brett, that was my initial, when I first heard the whole outcomes here, I was like, is that what that means? Everything's going to go back to direct response and CPA, right?
Buy now, get a free super chamois.
I don't think it necessarily, should mean that, but
Yeah.
I don't think that's that.
Yeah, I mean, 'cause outcomes, I think, just you're hinting at outcomes can be defined in a lot of different ways. In a brand awareness halo effect outcome, that let's say it's a financial services organization, it's an outcome that has some level of influence on a consumer journey where they get exposed to things deeper down funnel as they start to show more intent. So
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree with that.
AI a little bit earlier, like referral traffic. I mean, with AI summaries, I mean, I've seen different studies everywhere, anywhere from 25 to 96% of traffic dropping off, right? For publishers, obviously this will impact yield and monetization, right? From display. Love to know, like what is Hearst doing in this area? Some are calling it Google Zero, like the Google Zero moment, right? Knowing that, at some point it could go to there. We've seen some interesting things like in the industry. We talked about Cloudflare a little bit, their announcement kind of being the gatekeeper or wanting to collect tolls on behalf of publishers. I think Google was telling publishers, if you block our LLM bots from scraping you, we're not going to scrape you for search, right? I think there's a lot of things that are in flux here, but we know that this is a trend and is going to continue. And I do understand the traffic is already down, right? So wondering like what are you doing in this area over at Hearst? Love to hear about your thoughts.
Yeah. Well, definitely, all of those shifts. I mean, it does sort of remind me of social and sort of the, understanding UGC as a behavior for the first time and how to sort of get good at that. I think
that's a whole nother topic we could talk about.
I know, right?
Yeah,
I know.
yeah. Next up.
I think, we're all kind of going back to school and we're freshmen again, right? Like we don't know. So we've got to go and study and see how, what behavior is like and how do consumers engage with the quote unquote answer engines. I think answer is sort of implies a lot of finality and actually what they're getting you to do ask the next best question. But yeah, I would say, there's a lot of energy here around just studying what is happening and not missing that moment to sort of get to solutioning too quickly because it's such a seismic change. I'm actually really excited. We just kicked off some research that we're doing with a partner for one of our lifestyle brands to understand this very thing, right? How does the media brand show up both as part of an answer, not the source, but as part of the answer? And what are all the subtleties that we can learn about the sort of brand ethos around it? Where does it naturally occur? And so that's what I mean by we've got to go and study and really learn how these things kind of work in the wild. So that's part of what we're doing. Certainly Hearst has licensing models with OpenAI, with Rufus. So there's an element of that too, of, we've got to participate to
AP's
knowing
been doing that.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of I would say, different experiments around where we can leverage AI and create our own user experience. So if part of what will transform over time here is these new kind of surface areas where consumers are going deeper and deeper and deeper into getting more information, whether it's an answer or they're searching more. We're also experimenting to figure out, where do we sort of provide utility and types of information to support that. And so if you think about, all of the types of content that probably never makes it into an article, there is an element of sort of rescaffolding of the content, the sort of the CMS, if you will, of what are new ways that we might sort of leverage some of that information that is part of the sort of operation of just producing what was an article or what was a stream historically into new types of formats. And so there's a lot of innovation happening on that front. And I'll kind of bring it back to something that we're doing also in our team is really understanding the sort of semantic relationship of content. We're really sort of impressed by how far AI has come in helping us sort of innovate in that area. And so we see that as sort of an input too. If part of an objective is to have more kind of DTC consumer engagement, keep them in our environments longer, keep sort of serving up new ways for them to consume content or information from us, there's an element of personalization there potentially. And so we're doing, some innovation now to see how we can plume all of the data that we sit on and sort of, make it fit for purpose to feed some of those user experiences. So
Well, and it
there's
sounds
no
like-
one thing that
Yeah,
we
it
can
sounds
be
like the
doing.
end goal of that thought bubble is to drive more direct traffic, right, to Hearst properties, right? If your user experience is good, you're not forcing someone, because right now there's all this sort of hand waving in the industry, right? I mean, Jason Kent of DCN, Digital Content Next, who I think you guys remember, it's a trade association dedicated to the digital content companies. For those on the podcast that don't know it, just put out a study basically suggesting that zero-click search, which is largely driven by Google, is like a dead end in all of the data leading up until I think June of this year, based on their interviews with like 20 different members. I don't know if Hearst was part of that. And he just, all
dead
of the
end, as in like people are just not going to go from the search summaries to
and
your
so they've seen a
to your
precipitous
website.
and continuous decline every month over month. Through June 2025 of referral traffic. And there's a big call out from Jason, as well as Lou Piscalis. He did something on Substack on the topic about like the threat to the open web, right? The threat to the foundations of the open web. And so
Jessica, I'm assuming you consider Hearst to be part of the open web?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Because some of your sites probably have like authentication or logins, but most of them are just...
I mean, that's why I was yes, and there's absolutely a sort of registered user base. There's a subscriber user base. It sort of depends on the brand, and, across however many hundreds of domains, it's a little bit variable. But yeah, I mean, Lou certainly talked about this. One of my takeaways from his Substack about, sort of what's at risk here, it was interesting because he was really making the point as well that context matters.
Yep.
And
I'm glad you leaned into that.
So,
how LLMs are kind of giving you kind of a black and white read of the world, which takes out the context, which sort of denigrates the quality of content and has kind of harmful effects. It's kind of the right.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly right. Well, this is. I always sort of telegraph to other things when I see patterns, and immediately when I read that, what it reminded me of like sort of the beginning of digital advertising, where we went for, because digital, by the way, pre-programmatic, was all about selling contextual. You sold audience based on who came to the site, and then we sort of disaggregated the audience from the content. But linear television, historically was all about you sold the audience to the content, and then you had a pod. And so it when I was reading that, I sort of felt like, okay, we're getting yet another sort of disaggregation moment. But really what sort of got me thinking about his the role of context and the importance there is, at some level, this does come back to editorial. And I think only a company that is committed to sort of high quality information, journalistic principles, can offer that benefit of editorial and curation, and there's a value there. But I do think at times,
and it's an undervalued value.
Yeah, I mean, we have trained consumers at times to sort of think that we can get these things for free. And I maybe mentioned it early on, but before I got into media, I went to J school here in New York when I was like relatively new out of college. And I feel like what I took away from that experience is reporting is really hard. It is hard work. And so, I look at these things, it's like personal for me. I have such a sort of profound respect for how hard that is. And anyway, so it is important.
Yeah. I was an aspiring journalist at one point too, so I totally get it.
There are a lot of people in ad tech and media who...
All three of us, right? Yeah. Crazy. And then I thought, then I had the bad idea of like, maybe I'll write a novel. And I was like, well, that wasn't a good idea.
I'm still working on my great American novel, Brett, too.
We can all reconvene in 20 years and see if we've done it.
Okay. But I think it is interesting though, like this, what we're talking about now, right? Because, and I think publishers like generally don't understand that they have some leverage, right? Because these LLMs, they need accurate, vetted, fact-checked content, and publishers have that. They have loads of that. You have that in spades, right? So it's okay, like they need it, but they're going to get it from somewhere. I think
Yeah.
you'd rather they get it from you, right? So the new models can be trained on your data, and whether even if they're not sending, whether they're sending referral traffic back to you or not, I think you're contributing to those models, and you should be compensated something for it. I believe so. I think striking deals, and I think publishers that don't strike deals are going to find they're going to get scraped anyway somehow. I mean, that's my belief.
Is legalese, is sort of legal enforcement really going to work? It hasn't worked to date, or are we better off with solutions like Cloudflare? Right, and we've even gotten into some of the topics about pay per view, pay per article read, right? Monetize, on a not on a subscription basis, but on just an individual content read perspective, right?
Yeah, is that something you're gonna? Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting topic. I think Brian O'Kelly was talking about it a few months ago. I had a bunch of things I posted on it about, are micropayments a viable solution for publishers, right? And, micropayments, those who don't know what they are, they're very small payments, right? Because they're so small, I mean, sometimes we could be talking pennies. You probably can't use credit cards for them and credit card processors for payments. You probably need, like, maybe when people have thrown out stable coins, which are pegged to the dollar, right? So people have thrown this out. Is that a viable thing where people have a wallet, they click it, they pay. It's like, you buy gas and then you just expend it as you go visit sites. I mean, that's one solution. And I'm also a believer too, Brett, that, I don't think one thing's going to save publishing. I think it's going to need to be a bunch of different things deployed at once.
Yeah.
And kind of see what sticks. And maybe out of 10 things, 2 or 3 do, right? Or 4 do. And I don't know, but is that something that Hearst is like experimenting at all? Or I'd love to hear your personal views on it. If nothing else, Jessica, about that.
Personally, I haven't seen many of those experiences sort of in my own kind of traversing of my media diet. But I think it's the right idea insofar, and to be honest, I'm not sure if we have personally, in any of our brands, experimented at all with the micropayments. There are some of the things we have done, which I'll get into, but generally speaking, I think that I'm very sort of into the idea of experimenting with willingness to pay. And the value exchange, and in whatever format that comes, because sometimes for us that's as simple as, are you willing to give us some personal information in exchange to read this article, which depending on where that consumer sits in sort of how they value their own privacy or pennies on the dollar, they're a value exchange. And I do think as sort of purveyors of content and experiences, we can get really good at modernizing the look and feel of how we present those offers. But for me, it's even more fundamental of how can we reestablish this willingness to pay for content, which I find, totally the right idea.
You mentioned training people. We train them to expect free content that'll be subsidized by display, but yeah.
No, and we've also trained, in streaming by introducing sort of like the, freemium, sort of ad supported, all the way to subscription. I think it's all right. I mean, I think, every time you look at studies, you do start to see there are different cohorts that have different needs and wants, and those different sort of ways of getting to the content do have their own fit. So yeah, the things that we have, that I've seen a lot in our business is all around the sort of optimizing the subscription or the paywall and having those be very dynamic, which is, a little different than the premise of micropayments, but it's not that sort of far afield, right? It's sort of, we had, and this has been a lot of innovation in our newspaper business, but, the paywall and the reg walls can be very sort of, rigid instruments, if you will. And, what's been interesting to sort of study is that you've got a lot of people who may not be in a DMA where that paper is published every day, but like I'm from LA. I read about California, even though I haven't lived there in, 25 years at this point. And so I might have very different sort of behaviors of, being in a behind a paywall or accepting that. And so one of the things that that there's been a lot of work to do is to get really good at those meters and leverage a lot of AI and a lot of signals so that, we're doing our very best job of anticipating what the user on the other side, giving them sort of an option that we think is going to be most sort of relevant for them. But yeah, the micropayments will be interesting to see how it goes.
I find from a consumer experience perspective that the actual paywalls to be frustrating. I wonder if micropayments if there would be any less friction in that type of process, because then you're going to increase sort of the frequency of asking for payment. Right.
Totally. There's got to be, like, I think of The Economist. I love The Economist, but like, I don't have time to get through that magazine every week, right? So I paid for it for years, but as my life got busier, I just eventually was like, they piled up. I can't, like, so I canceled. But I would pay for it. But every once in a while, I'll see, like, on X or on LinkedIn, someone shares an article. It's always paywall. But I'd pay per article a small amount.
But
find some easy way to do it.
The other thing this is on a different end of the spectrum, but I really love the ability to gift an article. I think it's sort of so wonderful, and it comes with that like very cute little icon too, usually. So I think there's a lot there, but again, I think it's fundamental for to reestablish that value exchange. And this is so true because of, at the end of the day, what we're doing is we're reestablishing direct relationships with users, not through all sorts of intermediaries. And that's going to take a lot of...
That's a critical point. Yeah, because a lot of news, I'd like to see, I don't know if you know the numbers for this, but a lot of news is consumed through aggregators, whether it's Google News or Apple News, right? And oftentimes my local news, just in New Jersey, is blocked by paywalls. And so, which is incredibly frustrating from a consumer experience perspective, because I'm like, I just want to read about, XYZ that happened in the town over, and it's blocked by a paywall. And so I often go direct to publishers, but do you know what the stats are in terms of people using aggregators to consume news versus going direct?
I don't.
Well, I've heard it's 10 billion at least a year that's not going to publishers, that's being siphoned off by different. I think that's just Google and Meta, right?
Yeah.
That was the one. Yeah. I mean, I don't know how. I know that's one study, but it's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. Apple News is certainly big. I mean, X, was a lot of places where people would just get headlines, Threads, Blue Sky. I mean, so all of these things are sort of also generational a little too. We sort of grew up in the Facebook feed and X headline. So yeah, it's interesting. But I think doubling down on, at the end of the day, do they value the content enough? And the best thing for Hearst is that we invest so much in great content and quality that we have high confidence that consumers are going to want to meet us there. We haven't even scratched the surface in all the sort of data journalism. There's also different ways of sort of presenting that I think will appeal to different kind of cohorts of users over time too.
So direct relationships with consumers is a number one priority, it sounds.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, looking at content, I mean, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about, keyword blocking and brand safety and which is, I think your favorite topic, right? One of your top five, right?
Yeah.
And we're gonna have Zagorski on in a few weeks, by the way. So
also a friend and a former Nielsen colleague.
Yeah, he's part of the Nielsen Mafia, right?
Yeah.
Like, is there any interesting news there? I know that's been kind of a problem for publishers, let's say, a source of some I think valid complaints, right, about overzealous keyword blocking, and there's some. I think we quoted Brett like a couple episodes ago some of the numbers about what percent of content has been completely blocked. Some of it for let's say not the best reasons.
I was pretty surprised by this when I got here. Maybe it's just, it was a little ignorance on my part, but I'd sort of thought I thought we had solved brand safety. I mean, we were at Nielsen at the time where Nielsen was also sort of, innovating in this space. At some level, there is a change management aspect of this, of the fact that keyword lists don't have like perishable dates and they just sort of sit there and
they're
sort
not
of accumulate.
Exactly dynamic, are they?
I mean, it's sort of, I was so struck by, okay, that's actually how this works. And, we can sort of pick on, methodologies of how we do brand safety and suitability, but I think we would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge that part of this is just the sort of behavior of, things are very dynamic and content is very dynamic, and having these sort of persistent things that accumulate over time just probably doesn't meet the sort of dynamic nature of content. But for us, I mean, we just sort of decided that we could kind of help ourselves a little bit more. And so we have been working with some partners to help us understand newer methodologies that are a little bit more semantic in nature, that can get us a sort of corpus of data that says, this may be breaking news, but it's also safe or suitable or lower medium risk for these set of reasons. And we just felt we needed to bring our own own data sets to the equation, as opposed to just saying, hey, you shouldn't block news. There's a lot of good stuff here. And so we're working through that right now. I do think, what's probably going to be surprising for advertisers is just how much sort of missed opportunity and efficiency can be had, because these are high quality audiences, they're highly engaged. And so we're looking forward to sort of being able to expose more where we have not just brand safe, but highly sort of relevant environments for brands to be in. But, at some level, this comes down to sort of the mechanics of, how do we use ML? How do we use AI? How can we make these things more dynamic? And so it's been fun to sort of see where the methodologies have evolved.
Yeah. And it's gone from like the sledgehammer sort of approach with keyword block lists to you need more of a chisel approach, right? That's specific to, that's much more dynamic, much more adaptable.
That's
right.
right.
It's more like a shotgun approach. Everything, just immense blast radius, right? Like
because otherwise huge portions of your inventory get blocked for potentially reasons that aren't really valid.
Right.
Right.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there was this really sort of charming story that we discovered that when we were doing our own analyses, which was an article that was published from, I believe it was our West Coast station in Monterey. So it was from our television station's digital property. And they were reporting on, I think it was maybe labeled as an accident, but it was, a woman who had delivered a baby on the side of a road. And so that certainly created an emergency. But the whole story was this very heartwarming story about an EMT who had been trained just the weekend before, who was able to, manage the situation, deliver the baby. And it was like such a feel good story, but, blocked because, you had emergency and, all sorts of words that probably would have connoted something else. And so, everyone's got these kind of anecdotes, of course, but then let's have those kind of conversations with our advertisers to make sure that, we can bring forward environments that are brand safe, that are brand suitable, and highlight for them places where, maybe they hadn't considered, but that they would agree are, the right places for their brands to be.
Another topic we want to touch on a little bit was, let's say, supply path optimization or compression. And for those who aren't super big ad tech nerds, there's just been this belief that maybe publishers shouldn't be working with as many dozens of SSPs. It makes it very difficult to understand the whole supply path, right? And the whole supply chain for media. It adds additional fees. And, I guess there's a question about, by looking at the supply path, by potentially even maybe going direct to DSP for publishers, right? I mean, I think with Trade Desk has been doing some interesting things there, right? Mm-hmm. With OpenPath, right? I'd love to know your opinion on anything that's going on Hearst in terms of SSPs, exchanges, resellers, compressing that supply path, reducing hops, and anything to help really improve your monetization and yield.
Yeah. So I sort of phoned a friend because I knew we were probably going to talk about this. And because listen, I mean, things change so quickly. You kind of always want to stay close to where the business is headed. I think it's generally true that we're trying to get sort of closer to the advertiser and make the supply path as sort of short and clean as possible. So those, I think I mentioned it before, but those values kind of persist here too. We have direct integrations, we have strategic partnerships with the big DSPs and their kind of parent companies. I don't think we use resellers. That's not sort of really part of the strategy, but some of our divisions are also integrated with OpenPath. So again, here we're kind of, trying to sort of lean in and stay close, try a few strategies, if you will. Ultimately, it's still, we want to participate and be sort of closer to the advertiser with as much sort of transparency as we can about the quality of the inventory. And you can see that kind of in our SSP strategy and the SPO strategy as well.
Has there been an active effort to reduce number of SSPs or clean out the supply path at all? Or?
I don't know that I could really sort of speak to a specific number or target. I think it's about having the right partners. There's definitely, the SSPs, I've been trying to sort of understand and stay close to this concept of containerization as well, which was a new word that I, just started hearing a lot about, certainly in the last, several weeks. And so, I think we have to sort of stay close and understand what's our opportunity as these sort of dynamics are shifting. I mean, that is so fascinating to me because, it's sort of this, the way I think about it, it's like an unbundling of of that stack, right? You're sort of, unbundling the data, the custom algorithms. And so those types of things are also,
well,
stuff
the DSP, the
at.
roles of DSP and SSP kind of get are maybe up in the air, right? Like, where does this mediation or decisioning layer sit? If you take it kind of out of buy side, right? And maybe it kind of becomes an AI thing. Does it become a sell side thing, a supply thing? I mean, I think that's really interesting. And then the approach for containerization on sell side for let's say programmatic 3.0, right? I mean, Scott Messer talks about this all the time, right?
So, and then you've got the sort of ad serving layer in between. I mean, I remember, one of my last roles at Nielsen as I ran all the digital revenue, which included all of the platforms and the big walled gardens and the publishers, their digital businesses. And I remember inheriting that business. I'm like, there are hundreds of DSPs and SSP, hundreds and hundreds. And of course, that sort of went through a massive pruning. And then the sort of DSP functionality has sort of grown and grown over time. And we saw that certainly with streaming. So yeah, I mean, I think these things kind of always have a natural gyration to them. But, some of those dynamics are interesting to me because you've also got this ad serving layer, that happens
maybe the
in
SSP
between.
becomes a mini ad server, right? In this scenario, right? If you're taking mediation layer, moving closer to supply, and then DSPs, I mean, then you're probably going to see a million DSPs again because it's if they're not doing the decisioning, they'd be definitely less robust in their functionality. So it'd probably be easier to create one, right?
I know I've kind of said it a few times here, but partnerships in this space really do matter. And having good partnerships and sort of staying close to the partners that we work with on their kind of own sort of roadmap and innovation is, I think, really impressive about how Hearst works with different partners too, to sort of try to stay in front of certain areas. And so it's fun. We're kind of, we get to participate sometimes. We're not always leading all of those conversations, but for me, it'll be interesting to really see how the next sort of round of data, what are we really talking about? What can we do that's differentiated in that, regardless of how the sort of pipes start to shake out?
And are you internally tracking sort of the percentage of sales that are going through private marketplace, going through direct with KPIs that are sort of driven to increase that share of your total? There's been a lot of emphasis on the importance of content, on the willingness to pay and the valuation of that content, which is your core competency, and then that leans itself towards more direct sales. Right. And more direct relationships with consumers on the other side of the fence.
That's right. That's right.
So speaking of data and analytics, you did a ton of work on the measurement side, reach and frequency measurement, advanced analytics. I've been heavily involved in that from the Nielsen Marketing Cloud days with multi-touch attribution, kind of commercializing that, which was kind of a Matt Krepsick baby, and he's my new CEO, right, with the Visual IQ acquisition. And then I went to Newstar, where that was all our MTA, algorithmic logic to understanding consumer propensity and outcomes, et cetera, et cetera. How are you thinking, because you do come from, sort of that core cloth, that Nielsen cloth, how are you thinking about in implementing advanced analytics and attribution to prove outcomes to clients?
There's so much kind of at play of, what does the end market really need from us? So that's an early, stage journey for us. But it's been fun. I've been involved in different initiatives across our division and get to bring in vendors that I know from my prior life too. And so right now, more than anything, my activity is to sort of try to act as glue, stay connected, bring in and sort of recommend partners that maybe are used for a specific business unit for a specific reason, and try to sort of help informally, I would say, kind of establish that framework and portfolio. I'll add though, interestingly enough, Hearst as a brand, we brought on and retained an agency of record last year. We're working with our partner PMG so that we could market some of our media brands. And I've been heavily involved in not the campaigns, those are sort of led by our CMOs and our communications teams, but on how do we as now a brand put ourselves in the shoes of understanding how do we build reach and frequency across media channels today? How do we measure it? And so ironically, I'm working with companies I've worked at before and companies I've partnered before, and getting to see that sort of maturation of these capabilities as a brand, which is enormously informative to sort of where we think we want to go in building out our own capabilities.
It's interesting you bring it up. I think that's like figuring out like what's going to be attractive and palatable to CMOs, right? And I think that's like it's overlooked a lot, right? And I think the whole I love the fact there's been a lot of discussion the last like 6 months about a lot of the attribution stats aren't. I mean, technologies have not been. It's been more art than science. Like a lot of times. I mean, Fu talked about this. Brett, remember that about a lot of the attribution is gamed, right? And I think digital has been siphoning off taking credit for a lot of attribution. I think the platforms have been certainly accused of taking credit for a lot of attribution that they probably didn't do much to earn, right? And I think traditional channels have been punished for that. So. And maybe shifting more towards marketing mix modeling. Like again, another thing we're going back, right?
Yeah.
Maybe like that. We should be taking an approach that we want to be looking at the full consumer journey, maybe hitting these channels, and maybe we can't cleanly attribute everything, but we know people are there, so we should be in front of them.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and the challenge with MTA and MMA that's not sort of automated, especially as we practiced it at New Star, was just the length of time it took. Not only did you need the data sort of governance and housekeeping, like GM is a perfect example of a client of ours. They had 60 different data warehouses across their brand. 60. And so half of our job was literally unifying kind of what you do.
Cleansing,
unifying,
it's engineering. It's not data science.
Because you're not going to be able to do any of the advanced analytics and attribution unless you've got... So that in itself could take 6 months to a year.
They probably bought or licensing the same data at least 3 or 4 times. You're paying for it, right?
Exactly.
I mean, you find these big companies, like they'll do that. They're big, like we licensed the same Polk data 3 or 4 times and paid for it, right? And Polk did, never said anything. That would not surprise me. These big orgs, like it's
It's interesting too, because I mean, when I was working with people like Krepsic, like back in the day, market mix modeling was not about outcome. It was about channel allocation.
Yeah.
It was like
it's strategic. It's a strategic planning play.
Yeah. So it's been so fascinating to see how. We sort of all got sort of persuaded that we could be precisely deterministic everywhere.
Yep.
And, anyway, so now we're sort of back to probabilistic-ish, but the sort of unification of MTA and MMM is also just methodologically really fascinating as kind of practitioners. But I do believe, I'm trying to remember, there's an industry group, gosh, I'm forgetting the name now, which has for years been very consistent in talking about, despite sort of any of the perceived or real challenges with MTA, that we can't only do, like, we still have to build brands, we still have to build funnels, and you can't only sort of be optimizing to the conversion, because otherwise you have underweighted the opportunity to sort of identify people. And there was a period of time too where we called those impressions waste because they weren't in the target that was going to drive a conversion.
The underweighting piece that's the challenge, right? Because you end up it really is driven by algorithmic logic, because there's so many different influencing factors that drive, like consumer propensity. I'm going to buy a snow shovel if I don't have a snow shovel in advance of a snowstorm, right? Don't give credit to the last click or to the last impression or the view through impression or all that sort of stuff, right? And so media oftentimes gets overcredited. That was sort of Dr. Fu's argument, right? Radically overcredited, just in defense of a vendor, right, or an agency in the dollars they're spending. So
I mean, not to get so academic, but there was a time at Nielsen when we had different tools in our portfolio. We had MTA and MMM and brand lift and brand awareness. And I distinctly remember a few meetings with an advertiser where we had instrumented everything and then everything was in conflict. And it was sort of like, how can we have brand lift? How do you
wiggle your way out of that?
How can we have conversion and no brand awareness? Anyway, this is sort of, part of why sort of stepping back and not wading so quickly into what can we do at Hearst as a sort of media partner is in part because I think we've got to know where we have real strength in that media equation. Like, what's the job to be done? Because we can drive awareness, we can drive reach, but I come from a sort of a mindset of we should know exactly what job we're hired to do. And if it's to drive conversions, then you might be getting a creative, dynamically rotated creative in market and it's just that. But so I'm kind of,
Yeah,
caught up in this notion of like, if we're gonna do full funnel measurement, like, let's be clear on what's the media job to be done, and then let's measure it accordingly.
Well, if it's an outcome, I think outcome is broader then, right? It's not going to be outcome. It's not necessarily be conversion or
Exactly.
sale. It might be you're generating awareness. Like some of these products, like, Brett, you mentioned financial services, like might have a multi-year sales cycle, or buying a car, it's once every 7 years. So, unless you're going to hit the person like the month before they go to buy, right? I mean, it's like, and by then they might have already decided what they want from previous advertisements. So I think taking a broader view, if we are in the age of outcomes, I mean, like the outcome, it should span the full customer experience, right? From awareness through to consideration through to everything.
Although I think the age of outcomes, I'm going to finish with this, but I think the age of outcomes is suggesting that, well, we can't do that. We can't do full funnel measurement. So we're just going to name any outcome that you're going to measure, we can measure that discreetly. But
Last
I think
click.
when you...
It's back to last click, right?
It's back to last click. Well, this has been great. We covered all the topics, and thank you, Jess, for being such a good sport. And thank you for the show and tell. I mean, I think that made the episode.
Right. I hope it's not totally cringe of like, oh my God, here she goes with her framed visual aid, but oh well, I am who I am.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, thanks again. This was great.